Cristina, your lab is looking at ways to improve the effectiveness of CAR T-cell therapy. And before we dive into the rest of the Q&A, can you start by explaining what CAR T-cell therapy is?
Sure. Thank you so much for the question. So CAR T-cell therapy is a type of immunotherapy. And by definition, what we do is try to use the patient immune system to fight cancer. In the case of CAR T-cell therapy, what we do is engineer the cells to give them the ability to actually fight cancer. So what happens when a patient receives CAR T-cell therapy is that the patient comes to the clinic and we collect a large amount of white blood cells from the patient through a process that is called leukapheresis. Then we receive the leukapheresis in the lab, and what we do is from this leukapheresis, we try to isolate the type of T cells that are going to be better suited to fight cancer. So depending on the trial, we use T cells or we use a subset of these T cells that are younger or more stem-like, so they would have better anti-tumoral properties. Once we have this subset of cells, what we do is modify them genetically so they can express the actual CAR. So the CAR is a chimeric antigen receptor and is a synthetic molecule that we have developed in the lab to give this ability to the T cells to actually recognize and kill tumor cells. So the way the CAR works is that it has an extracellular domain that is like an antibody. So it recognizes any antigen that would be otherwise recognized by an antibody. And then it has an intracellular signaling domain that signals the same as an activated T cell. So the way it works is that we modify the T cells in the lab, we expand them in the lab as well, and then we infuse them back to the patient. So once it's in the patient, these T cells circulate around the body, scanning all the cells of the body until they find a cell that expresses this epitope that is recognized by the antibody domain of the CAR. So when these T cells find this epitope that is expressed in a tumor cell, what they do is activate the ability of the T cells to kill. So they kill the tumor cell and then they keep proliferating and they keep expanding through the body, circulating again to find more tumor cells. So the way it works is that the same T cells that you have made in the lab, once in the body, they keep expanding until they ideally eliminate the whole tumor mass. So this has shown very huge amount of success for blood malignancies, for leukemia, lymphoma, multiple myeloma. And the challenge is now to actually be able to achieve the same type of efficacies, but in solid tumors.
Why does CAR T-cell therapy show great promise in treating various types of cancer?
Yeah, so we have shown as a proof of principle that CAR T-cell therapy can eliminate completely tumor cells in hematologic cancers. So the idea is that because it's based on synthetic biology, you can now, in the lab, redesign these CARs to target any potential antigen, it's called, or any potential protein that is expressed in a tumor. So as long as you can identify a protein that is expressed in your tumor at high level, and that is not expressed in normal cells, or it's expressed but at a much lower level, then using synthetic biology, you can design a receptor that instead of targeting a protein that is expressed in a blood tumor, to target a protein that is expressed in a solid tumor. So you could potentially design a receptor that can target any of the cancers that today are basically killing a lot of people. So that's why what we are actually trying to do in the lab. So what we in my lab are doing is we identify the protein that is very highly expressed in melanoma, and we design a synthetic receptor that targets this protein, and we engineer it in the T cells, and it actually gives a very strong anti-tumor activity. So what we are doing right now is doing all the safety and efficacy and feasibility experiments that are required by the FDA before we can actually get the approval to launch our first clinical trial.
How are researchers like yourself making CAR T-cell therapy more accessible and more affordable?
Yeah, sure. So I think the first step that was very important for the field was to show that CAR T-cell therapy can actually cure a lot of people and can save a lot of lives. So we have so far shown that. And now there's a bunch of resources, a bunch of companies, academic institutions, a lot of people working on finding ways to actually make this therapies more accessible to a broader part of the population. So there are several strategies that the field is investigating to try to make these therapies more broadly available. And I would highlight two of them. One of them is making allogenic CAR T-cell therapies. So what I explained so far is that what we do is have the patient come to the clinic, we collect their own cells, we modify them, and we infuse them back. But this requires that we need to make a cell product for every patient. And that is very time consuming, it is very expensive, and it requires facilities and personnel that are very highly trained, which is actually very difficult to do. So what the field is trying to do is develop therapies that can actually use cells from a donor. When you do that, you would have cells from a donor that are modified in a very controlled setting, in a very scalable setting. And then you can use these cells to treat multiple patients. So that would make the therapy way easier and much more accessible, because with one manufacturer, you could treat many more patients, right? And it's also more standardized because you can use cells from a donor that you have previously characterized, so you know exactly how to modify the cells. So that's one of the approaches that the field is working very actively on. And another one is to create engineering strategies that just simplify the manufacturing process a lot. So they are creating systems that allow to manufacture in a much more automated and easier way. In a sense, it would be like creating some equipment that could actually just allow you to manufacture the cells with a machine in the same clinic. And so the machine would automatically do the CAR T-cell manufacture. And in other instances are just cells that would be manufactured in a facility, but it would allow to basically do it with much less personnel, or in a more closed system, centralized, that you could be manufacturing cells for many patients at the same time. So there's many strategies ongoing, and the people are trying to basically see how we could reduce the cost and the amount of personnel required to do this CAR T-cell manufacturing. So I think there's a lot going on the field, and I am 100% convinced that we are going to see these therapies widely applicable for a large amount of patients. I think it's just a matter of time and investing the resources. We just need to be aware that we saw that the first approval happened like 5 years ago, and the field is expanding and it's exploding, and like we are doing a lot. It's advancing very fast, but it's very new. So I think we are going to see huge advances in the next 5 to 10 years. I'm absolutely convinced.